Hello, everyone. I am the Sleep Storyteller, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out a lot. Also, let me know in the comments, where are you from and what time are you listening? Now get comfortable and relax. The old wizard had wandered through Middle-earth for countless years, collecting the stories that might otherwise be swallowed by time's relentless tide. Tonight, under a sky freckled with pale stars, he shared one such tale, a whisper from the ruins of an age long past, a fate sealed in shadows, and a secret buried deep beneath the blackened stones of Mordor. The air above the battlefield was thick with the scent of blood and steel, mingling with the acrid ghost of fire long extinguished. Where once the banners of Gondor and Rohan had danced upon the wind, only tattered remnants remained, shivering over fields littered with the fallen. The great shadow that had loomed over this world had been torn asunder, its cry, a thing of malice and despair, silenced forever. The Witch King of Angmar, the most terrible of the nine, Sauron's greatest servant, had been vanquished. His form had unraveled, a spectral wound upon the world, his armor collapsing into an empty husk, a thing no longer bound by flesh or will. None among the living knew where his essence had gone, if it had been dragged howling into the abyss, or had simply ceased to be. Only the lingering echo of his final scream remained, rippling through the unseen places of the world like a dying flame, far beyond the ruin of the battlefield, beyond the shattered gates of Minas Tirith, where the blackened mountains of Mordor cast their endless shadows. The remaining 8 Nazgûl stirred. Though their captain had perished, their fate was still chained to the will of their master. From the sky, where they circled on wings of terror, they felt the wound in the world where he had fallen a tear in the fabric of their existence. It was not grief they felt, nor rage, for such things had been stolen from them long ago. Yet something shifted, something fragile and unknown, as if a hand had loosened its grip upon their spirits for the first time in an age. Still they obeyed. Their fell beasts shrieked as they wheeled away from the broken lands of battle, their black cloaks streaming behind them like banners of shadow. They turned toward Mordor, toward the pulsing heart of their dominion, toward the one who still held their leash. And yet, Mordor was not as it had been. As they flew, the great tower of Barad-dûr trembled, its foundations shivering as though gripped by an unseen dread. The great eye that had once burned in its heights flickered, its terrible gaze stretching thin, its power stretched beyond what it could bear. The wraiths felt it, a whisper of unease slithering into the hollows where their thoughts had once dwelled. For the first time since their enslavement, the chain that bound them had loosened. Not broken, not yet, but enough that they faltered. Still they obeyed. They swept across the desolation, over the ashen wastelands where nothing lived, but things too twisted to die. The winds of Mordor howled in eerie chorus, a dirge for a kingdom that was not yet fallen, but was already dying. Below, the Orc legion still stood within the Black Gate, with within the endless tunnels of Barad-dûr, but fear had begun to gnaw at them. They, too, had felt the shift, the uncertain grip of a master whose power was failing. In the hollows of the dark tower, something ancient stirred, something vast and patient, something that had waited longer than even the wraiths themselves. The 8 came to land at the foot of Barad-dûr, their beasts clawing at the jagged spires with talons like black iron. The air here was thick and poisoned, yet to them it was as breath itself. For centuries uncounted, this had been their home. And yet, something was wrong. The tower, once ablaze with Sauron's unyielding will, now flickered uncertainly, as if its very foundations were unraveling. The power that bound them had not yet snapped, but it had begun to fray at the edges, like a rope stretched too thin. They stood upon the blackened ground, their forms wavering in the dim torchlight, shadows cast without shape. Then a voice, faint at first, but growing. It did not call from the heights of the tower, nor from the hidden forges below, where Sauron's cruelest works still smoldered. No, it came from somewhere deeper, somewhere older. It was not a command. It was not a summons. It was something else entirely. A voice that called not as a master to a servant, but as one shadow calls to another. The wraiths turned as one. The sound did not come from the sky, nor the scorched earth. It came from below. Beneath the great foundations of Mordor, beneath even the halls where Sauron had once walked in physical form, lay tunnels ancient and forgotten, untouched even by the Dark Lord's gaze. The voice called from within them, whispering words that did not echo, yet pressed against the empty void where their souls had once been. They had once been kings, lords of men, bound in eternal servitude to the One Ring. They had long since ceased to know their own will. Thought itself had become a distant memory. And yet, as the Dark Lord's power wavered, something else pulled at them. Something that had waited beyond time. They stepped forward. The earth groaned beneath their weight. The path was hidden behind the ruins of a forgotten temple, long since swallowed by the black stone of Mordor's foundations. A gate loomed before them, rusted iron, its markings older than even their accursed existence. Dark letters writhed upon its surface, shifting as they looked, never the same twice. The leader among them, once a Númenorian king, now nameless and hollow, raised a spectral hand and touched the gate. A sound like breaking bones shuddered through the air. The rusted iron trembled, resisted, then groaned open. Beyond the threshold lay darkness. Not the darkness of Mordor, nor the shadows they had long called home. This was something deeper, something that had never known the light of the stars. The wraiths did not hesitate. They crossed into the black, and the gate closed behind them. The passage swallowed them whole. No torch burned to light their way. No flickering embers clung to the walls to offer even the illusion of sight. Yet the wraiths did not need light. The world they inhabited was one of whispers and void, a place where form was uncertain, sound carried weight it should not. The deeper they moved into the earth, the less the air smelled of fire and ruin. Here, there was something older than death itself, a cold, dry scent that whispered of things long buried. Their forms did not stir the dust, for they had long since lost the weight of flesh. Their tattered cloaks trailed behind them like remnants of forgotten banners, brushing against walls slick with something that pulsed faintly, as though the very stone had learned to breathe. They did not speak. They did not need to. The voice that had called them still pressed against the hollow spaces where their thoughts had once dwelled, guiding them ever downward. And then, without warning, the path widened into a vast chamber. It stretched before them into infinity, black stone rising in jagged, uneven columns like the bones of some long-dead god. Ruins jutted from the abyss below, broken spires and shattered bridges, remnants of a world that had once been, but was no longer. Here, even the darkness of Mordor seemed dim. Here, the shadows were deeper, more complete, untouched by Sauron's dominion. And the voice spoke again. You were not the first. The words did not echo. They did not vibrate against the stone. They settled over the wraiths like a shroud, coiling around them, pressing into the hollows where their ears had once been. They did not answer, not yet, for though they had stood upon battlefields without fear, though they had walked through the centuries unchanged by the passing of time, they felt now something unfamiliar, something that was not dread, for dread was a mortal thing, a thing of flesh and heartbeat. No, this was something else, a hesitation, a pause that was not rooted in caution, but in something deeper. For here, in the heart of a forgotten world beneath Mordor, they were no longer the masters of shadow. Something else waited in the dark. A wind moved, though it was not wind at all. It did not stir their cloaks, did not carry the scent of stone or decay. It was a cold that whispered not against the skin, but against the soul, a chill that slithered into the empty spaces within them, seeking the last remnants of what they had once been. The faintest echoes of kings, the dim, flickering embers of lords who had once commanded great cities, who had once ruled over men before they had been ruled themselves. You were not the first to wear the chains of shadow. The tallest of them, the one who had once been a Númenorian king, took a step forward. His movement was slow, deliberate. He had seen many things in his long existence, had gazed into the Palantiri, and watched the ruin of kingdoms before they fell, had felt the cold steel of betrayal before he had ever understood the price of eternity. And yet, this was different. This was something he had not foreseen. Who speaks? The words that emerged from him were not a command, not a challenge, but something quieter, something edged with a thought he had not expected to form. A question, and questions were dangerous, for questions implied a gap in knowledge, an uncertainty, and uncertainty was the first step toward doubt. The abyss did not answer at once. The silence stretched, thick and oppressive, pressing down upon them as if the void itself was aware, watching, considering. And then, at last, the the whisper returned. You were not the first to be swallowed by the will of another. Something stirred within them, something deep, something that should not have remained after so many centuries of servitude. It was not a memory, not truly, not as mortals remembered, but as one recalls the faintest trace of a dream upon waking, a flicker at the edges of their being, not strong enough to take form, but enough to unsettle. The voice had pulled it from them. It had reached into the void where their souls had once been, and found something they had not known remained. You were not the first, and for the first time in an age, the Nazgûl hesitated, not out of fear, something worse. The abyss stretched before them, an endless wound in the fabric of the world. It was not simply darkness, not merely the absence of light. It was something older, something that had never known the warmth of the stars or the gaze of the moon. A place where time itself seemed uncertain, where the stone beneath their feet pulsed with a slow, sickly rhythm, as though the very bones of the earth had learned to breathe. The tallest of them, the one who had once worn a crown, though he had long since forgotten the feel of its weight, tilted his head slightly, his unseen gaze fixed upon the void. What are you? The whisper came at once. I am the silence between the ages. It was not an answer, not truly, but it was something. A pause, a long, terrible pause. And then, softer this time, almost expectant. You have walked in shadows so long that you no longer remember the light. The wraiths did not move. For the first time in their long, hollow existence, they did not know what to do. And the abyss waited. The abyss did not stir. It did not breathe, nor did it pulse like a living thing. And yet the weight of its presence pressed against them, vast and unseen. The wraiths stood at its precipice, motionless, neither retreating nor advancing. They had been bound to the will of another for so long that even hesitation felt foreign to them. But the voice had reached something within them, something buried beneath centuries of servitude, beneath the weight of the ring's command, beneath the silence where their names had once been. You were not the first. The words clung to them like a whisper of memory, curling at the edges of thought. They had not considered before that others had walked this path. They had believed themselves unique, the chosen instruments of Sauron, his most feared and faithful servants. But now, standing upon the edge of this abyss, with its voice wrapping around them like smoke, they could no longer be certain. You say we were not the first, the tallest wraith murmured, his voice like a breath of wind over dead earth. Then who came before? The abyss did not answer immediately. Instead, something shifted. Not movement, no wind, no ripple in the shadows, but something deeper, a shift in understanding, as though the darkness itself was folding inward, tightening around them. They were kings, as you were, the whisper came at last. They were lords, as you were. They were men before they were not. The wraiths remained silent. But the weight of the words settled upon them like dust, sifting through the cracks in their existence, seeping into the spaces where thoughts had long since withered away. Men, before they were not. It was an idea that should have meant nothing to them now. And yet, the words clung to them, refusing to be dismissed. Where are they now? Another wraith spoke this time, his voice lower, rougher. The question should not have mattered, but it did. They are forgotten. A pause, but not gone. The abyss stretched before them, and for the first time in an age, they felt something close to unease. For here, in this place, they were no longer unquestioning servants. Here, they were being told that there was something beyond what they had known, something that had existed before them, and something that remained even now, waiting in the dark. You were not the first. Asterisk, the voice repeated. The wraiths did not respond, but in the silence between them, something shifted, something unspoken, a memory, not of battle, not of conquest, not of the whispers that had led them to their doom. It was something older, something deeper, a flicker at the edges of their being, just beyond reach, the last thing they had lost. The silence stretched. The abyss did not press them, did not command. It only waited, and that, more than anything, unsettled them, for they had always been told. They had never been asked. And now, here in the dark, they were being given something that should not have been possible. A choice. The tallest of them took another step forward. His cloak whispered against the stone, a sound so faint that it barely existed at all. If they are not gone, he murmured, then where are they? And the abyss whispered back, come and see. The abyss did not stir, did not shift, and yet the invitation pressed against them like a tide that could not be resisted. The wraiths had never been called before, only commanded. And still, the voice did not demand. It did not seek to control them as Sauron had. It simply waited, patient as stone, expectant as the silence between breaths. For the first time in centuries, they hesitated, and then they stepped forward. The darkness swallowed them whole. There was no descent, no sense of movement, no shifting of air or space. The world did not stretch before them, it simply changed. One moment, they stood at the precipice of the abyss, their forms wreathed in the only certainty they had ever known. The next, they were somewhere else. The wraiths had walked through many ruins before. They had watched the bones of kingdoms crumble beneath the weight of time, seen palaces turn to dust, great towers fall, and empires vanish into history. But this place was different. The ruins that surrounded them now were not like those of Gondor, nor the broken halls of Numenor, nor even the shattered remnants of the Dark Lord's conquests. These ruins had never been shaped by mortal hands. The stone was black, yet it gleamed with a dull, unnatural sheen, as though the light that once touched it had been devoured. Vast pillars, twisted and worn by forces beyond reckoning, stretched high into an unseen void, vanishing into the endless dark. Great carvings, marks of a language they did not know, yet somehow understood, coiled along the walls, shifting when the eye passed over them, refusing to be fully seen. This was not a place that had simply fallen to ruin. This was a place that had been forgotten. The wraiths did not speak. They had no words for what they beheld, no names for the things that pressed at the edges of their awareness, whispering truths they had never known to question. And then the voice returned. This was the first kingdom. It did not echo. The words pressed into them, folding over their hollow forms like the weight of unseen chains. The first to fall, the first to be lost, the first to be devoured. The tallest of them turned his unseen gaze toward the endless spires, his mind shifting through the fragments of what little remained of himself. 1,000 years of conquest, 1,000 years of silence, 1,000 years of nothing. And yet, the voice spoke of something older still. What was this place? He asked. The abyss whispered back. It was the beginning. The ruins stretched before them, endless and unyielding. Bridges of black stone, broken and crumbling, led toward a vast chasm where something pulsed, slow, steady, like the breath of something vast and waiting. The air here did not move, and yet it felt heavy, thick with something unseen. The wraiths took another step forward. They did not know why, and then they saw them. The shapes loomed in the darkness, half buried in the ruins, their forms barely distinguishable from the stone. They were not statues, not remnants of some lost civilization. They were figures wrapped in shadow, figures whose edges wavered like mist, yet whose presence was undeniable. Figures like themselves. You were not the first. The voice was closer now, no longer distant, no longer whispering from some unseen place. It was among them. It had always been among them. The wraiths stood motionless. The shadows within the ruins did not move. And yet they were not empty. They were watching, and for the first time in their hollow existence, the Nazgûl understood what it was to be afraid. The figures did not move, yet the wraiths could feel them, shadows pressed against the edges of the abyss, watching, waiting. They did not speak, did not breathe, did not stir, and yet they were there. The Nazgûl had never known what it was to be watched. They had been the hunters, the seekers, the ones whose gaze sent kings to their knees and warriors to despair. But now, in the heart of a place forgotten even by time, they stood before beings older than they, wrapped in silence so vast that even the darkness felt deeper. For the first time in an age, something like unease slithered through them. The tallest of them, the one who had once been a Númenorian king, took another step forward. His voice, when it came, was quieter than before. Who are you? The answer did not come from the figures. It came from the abyss itself. We are the ones who came before. The voice did not echo. It did not ripple across the ruins like a sound should. It was simply their asterisk, a presence that settled over them like the weight of a great unseen tide. The wraiths did not respond. They only listened. You call yourselves wraiths, but you are only echoes. You were unmade once, but not undone. You serve, but you do not know why. You exist, but you do not know what you are. The words pressed into them. They were not cruel nor kind. They simply were asterisk. And that, more than anything, unsettled them, because they had never been asked to asterisk. No asterisk. They had only ever been asterisk, told asterisk. The figures within the ruins did not move. And yet, something about them was shifting, pressing into the edges of awareness like a forgotten thought, struggling to resurface. The wraiths had no eyes to see, no breath to hold, and yet they felt something stir within them, something ancient, something fragile, a memory, not of war, not of death, not of the rings upon their fingers, a memory of silence, not the silence of a battlefield before the charge, not the silence of death, but the silence of a world before they had been claimed, before they had fallen asterisk. The abyss whispered again, "You were not the first to be swallowed by the will of another." The wraiths did not move. The abyss did not press them, but the silence between them was no longer empty. It was waiting, and for the first time in 1,000 years, they did not know what would come next. Part 6. The wraiths did not retreat, but neither did they move forward. They stood upon the threshold of something vast, something unknowable, something that should not have existed at all. And yet, here it was. Here they were. The figures in the ruins remained still, but the abyss itself was watching. You were not the first. The voice pressed into them again, and this time, it did not feel like a whisper. It felt like asterisk truth, the tallest among them, the one who had once ruled as a great king, turned his unseen gaze toward the shadows. "Then who were you?" The figures did not answer. The abyss did. "We were the ones who sought eternity. We were the ones who traded ourselves for power. We were the ones who believed that to be beyond death was to be beyond weakness." A pause, and we were wrong. The wraiths did not speak. They had no words, because they had thought the same. They had asterisk, believed asterisk the same. And now, they were looking upon what remained of those who had walked that path before them. "What happened to you?" Asterisk, one of the Nazgûl finally asked, though his voice was barely more than a shadow of a thought. The silence that followed was heavy, thick, and then the abyss whispered, "We were forgotten." The words struck something within them. For what was a wraith, if not something forgotten? What were they, if not echoes of names that no longer had meaning? And yet, they still were asterisk, still bound, still asterisk something. But the figures before them, they were nothing, and for the first time in an age, the wraiths knew what it was to fear. They had never feared the light, nor the flame, nor the swords of men. They had never feared death, for death had long since abandoned them. But this was something worse. "Are we to become like you?" the tallest wraith asked. The abyss did not answer at once, but when it did, the whisper was softer than before. That is the question, is it not? And the wraiths, the last remnants of kings long lost, stood upon the edge of the abyss, and asterisk remembered asterisk, not as men remember, not as the living remember, but as those who have walked too far into shadow and realized, too late, that they can no longer see where they came from. The abyss did not move. The figures did not stir, but the wraiths, for the first time in an age, they did not know whether to step forward or turn away, and the silence waited for them to decide. The words did not command, did not pull at their essence like the voice of their master once had. No, this was something else, something that should not have existed within them. A choice. The wraiths did not move. For an age, they had been bound to Sauron's will, his commands shaping them like an iron mold. They had known nothing but his whispers, his purpose filling the void where their own desires had once lived. But now, the hand that had guided them was gone. The voice that had ruled them was silent. And standing upon the edge of this abyss, before the remnants of those who had come before, they faced a truth they had never considered. What remained of them when there was no one left to command them? The shadows before them did not stir. They had once been kings, warriors, rulers who had reached for eternity and found only emptiness. Now, they were little more than echoes, clinging to a place forgotten, even by the Dark Lord himself. Is this what we are to become? Asterisk, one of the Nazgûl whispered. The abyss did not answer. It did not need to. The tallest of them, the one who had once been a Númenorian king, though his name was long lost, turned his unseen gaze downward. The stone beneath them pulsed faintly, as though the world itself was breathing in slow, shuddering gasps. He had once stood upon a great throne, had once spoken words that bent the will of men, had once believed himself beyond the reach of death. And yet, here he was, standing at the precipice of something far worse than death, a fate without end, a silence without meaning. There is no returning from this, he murmured, though whether he spoke to the others or to himself, he did not know. The abyss stirred. No, it whispered, there is not. The Nazgûl did not fear fire, nor swords, nor the passing of ages. But this was a fear they had never known, for what was left of them, if they too faded into the dark. And worse still, what if nothing was left at all? The silence stretched, heavy and unyielding. The abyss did not move, yet it felt closer now, pressing in on all sides. The wraiths had never known a moment where they were not bound, where they were not driven forward by the will of another. Now, they stood at the threshold of something vast and unknown, and they did not know how to move. The tallest among them, the one who had once been a Númenorian king, took another step forward. His form did not cast a shadow, did not stir the dust, yet something unseen trembled at the edges of the world as he moved. If there is no return, he murmured, then what lies ahead. The abyss whispered back, "Only what you have not yet chosen." A pause. For the first time in an age, your path is not written for you. The chains that bound you are loosened, but you must decide whether to remain in them or to step beyond them. The wraiths did not speak. They had never been asked to choose. Their fate had been sealed the moment they had taken the rings, the moment they had fallen into shadow, the moment they had become something less than men, yet more than ghosts. And yet, the abyss spoke of a different path. The figures within the ruins had once been like them. Kings who had sought eternity, lords who had tried to escape the grip of time, only to become lost in the dark. The wraiths could feel them still, waiting, watching, not as masters or enemies, but as those who had already reached the end of the road. And if we do not choose? Asterisk, one of the Nazgûl asked, his voice barely more than a hollow whisper. The abyss did not waver. Then you will remain as you are, until time forgets you. A terrible stillness followed. They had already been forgotten by history, their names erased, their faces lost. They had been creatures of will, of obedience, of a master's command. But if they lingered here, if they remained bound to nothing but the silence, what would they become? Not wraiths, not men, not even echoes, just nothing. The Númenórean wraith turned his unseen gaze toward the others. He could not see their thoughts, but he felt their hesitation, their uncertainty, the weight of the silence pressing against them all. For the first time, no will commanded them forward. For the first time, the choice was their own, and that was more terrifying than anything they had ever faced. The weight of the abyss settled around them, vast and endless. The wraiths had never been without purpose, never stood in a place where no voice called them forward. Yet here they were, surrounded by those who had come before, those who had reached for eternity and found only emptiness. For the first time in an age, the silence was not an absence, it was a question. The tallest of them, the one who had once been a Númenórean king, knew what it meant to command, to wield power that could shape the world. But now, he stood upon the edge of something far greater than any kingdom he had ruled. And for the first time, there was no will but his own. He turned his gaze toward the abyss. If we choose to step forward, what will we become? The voice did not answer at once. The abyss did not promise. It did not command. It only whispered, "You will be what remains." The wraiths did not move. They had no breath, no heartbeat to measure the passage of time. But they felt the moment stretch like the pull of the tide. What were they, if not what Sauron had made them? What were they, if not the will of the One Ring? The ruins stretched before them, filled with those who had been lost before them. If they lingered, would they too become nothing but remnants, forgotten even by shadow itself? The choice lay before them, not as a command, not as an order, but as something far more dangerous. A chance. The tallest among them stepped forward. His cloak did not stir, His form did not change, but something in the world around him, shifted. The silence deepened, and the abyss waited. The abyss did not resist him. It did not pull him deeper, nor did it consume him. It simply was endless and unmoving, waiting for the choice that had never been given before. The other wraiths stood behind him, silent, their forms wavering like shadows caught between existence and oblivion. For the first time in an age, they were not following a command. They were not bound by the call of the ring, nor by the will of the Dark Lord. They had no master. They had no path. They only had themselves, and the question that loomed over them, heavy as stone. If I step forward, the tallest among them whispered, do I cease to be what I am? The voice of the abyss did not answer in words. Instead, something shifted in the air, not sound, not movement, but an understanding that pressed into the empty spaces where their thoughts had once been. They had been unmade once, but they had never been undone. They had not disappeared when the one ring was destroyed. They had not perished when their master's voice was silenced. They had endured, and if they stepped forward now, they would endure still. Then we are not lost. Another wraith asked, his voice cautious, as if afraid of what the answer might be. The abyss whispered, you are only lost if you refuse to walk. The tallest of them turned his unseen gaze to the ruins around them. The remnants of those who had come before still lingered, watching, waiting, their fates sealed by choices they had made long ago. But the Nazgûl were not yet bound to that same fate. Not yet. He took another step. The abyss did not consume him. The darkness did not claim him. The silence did not erase him. He still was and behind him the others followed. They did not know where the path would lead. They did not know what lay beyond the abyss. They did not know if they would ever be free of what they had become. But for the first time in an age, they did not walk because they were commanded. They walked because they chose to. And that was enough. For now,